In this video, we're going to make some very simple models for the lab dealing with modeling fundamentals. We're going to model some simple wooden toys, like a play set you'd see in a kid's room of like a house and some things to go with it. So make sure that you are prepared to work by, starting a new scene, saving out your scene in the correct place, and getting your grid set up correctly. So we're going to first start by building a little house. So to begin, I'm going to pick the primitive that is closest to the shape of the house, which is going to be a cube. Now the default cube is a little bit too small. So if we go to the attribute editor, we do need to make it a little bit larger because a 1 centimeter cube, a little small for a kid's toy. It's going to be closer to maybe like a 4 centimeter by 4 centimeter by 4 centimeter cube. And we also want to make sure that we're keeping that pivot point in the bottom. This will make it a little bit easier to kind of work with in place. So once we have our cube created, I'm going to then first rename it to house. And I do want to add some extra subdivisions so that I can work with this a little bit better. So the first one is I do need to make kind of like a peaked roof. So I'm going to add a subdivision on the width. So I'll be able to pull this upwards. For the shape, that's all I'm going to need for right now. So I'm going to go to my modeling toolkit and I'm going to get my edge select. But before I begin, I do want to make sure that I have my step snap turned on. If you haven't worked with the step snap before, the really nice thing about this is if you set it to step snap absolute, it will move your, whatever you have selected, it will move it based off of that amount. So if we only want to move 0.5 centimeter, we're only going to snap it to 0.5 centimeter so that we can, if we wanted a full centimeter, we can switch it to a full centimeter and it'll snap to that size. So we can keep our models a little bit cleaner. Don't forget that this is turned on though. Once you don't need it, make sure you do turn it off. Otherwise you might end up getting frustrated that you're trying to do something and it's not quite working. But for now, a step snap of 0.5 centimeter will probably work for me because all I need to do is grab this edge and start pulling it upwards till I get closer, maybe something like that. That looks pretty good, to like a house kind of shape. There you go. We can add a little bit more detail to this since it is kind of a little bit of a boring sort of house shape. So what we can do first is let's work on some extrudes. So I'm going to go to my face extrude. I'm going to select these two roof pieces and I'm going to turn on the extrude tool. Usually, I like to just use my move tool where I hold shift and extrude it upwards. Like that can be a way to work with this, and that is a really good method to kind of get a lot quicker. But we can take a look at what's actually inside this extrude tool to see if we can, see what we can do. Usually by default, some of these might be a little bit much, so we might want to drop like that thickness back down as well as the offset. But we can then kind of play around with what this means. So thickness, if we push it upwards, we can see that it's kind of like pushing it kind of out. Do you see that? Offset, on the other hand, you can see that it kind of deals with like if we do an offset inwards, it's kind of making it almost like a faceted sort of look, but I don't really want that kind of a look to it. So let's set the offset back to 0. You can also mess with the local Z translate. That'll kind of give you a slightly different look as well. But I kind of just need it to be kind of thick out like this, but I do kind of want that little bit of ridge that's sticking out down there that we weren't getting by just holding shift and pulling it out. So I'm going to give this a thickness of 2. And if I switch back to my select tool, we can confirm that. Next, I'm going to grab this face. I'm going to hold shift and select this face. Because next I'm going to just extrude these out just a little bit to kind of give it a little bit more of a roofy kind of look to it. So I'm going to click the extrude again. I'm going to zero these out because it's definitely not correct. And I just need to give it a little bit of thickness, just like maybe a 0.2. So it's just kind of sticking out a little. Next, let's select, I'm going to use Hit Q to get my select tool. I'm going to select all these polygons. Same thing on this side. Select those polygons. So it's on that side and that side. I'm going to do another extrude. Set that to 0. And just give it probably another thickness of closer to 0.2. I think 0.2 will work. With the idea that we just have kind of a nice little lip on this. So if we were to deselect it, it looks like a pretty decent house. Do you see how it's getting a little bit funny right there? If that ever happens to you, that's pretty easy to fix. This just has to do with the hardness and softness of our edges. So I'm going to select this top edge. I'm going to go underneath Mesh Display. I'm going to choose Harden Edge. And if I deselect it, we can see that it is now a hard edge, so we get that nice crisp edge. Hardened and softened edges are useful for kind of controlling the look of your stuff. We can go into a little more detail with this in a minute, like in a couple other assets. So let's keep going with this. And let's add a little bit of color. It's pretty boring right now. Let's add some color to this. So we've kind of shown before that you can just select faces, right click, and assign new material. What if you just kind of need to make a bunch of materials and you don't want to really use that menu? If you click this little icon here, it looks kind of like a blueberry, like a weird blueberry. This is your hypershade. It'll pop open a new window, and this is actually how you can access all of the materials in your scene. There's some default ones here, but we don't really want to mess with those. Instead, we need to make just some new ones. We do still want to work with the Lambert, so I'm going to click on Lambert, and we can see we get our new little thing here. I'm going to call this one just blue, because we're going to make a nice blue house. And then I can pick my color. So maybe it's going to be like a smoky kind of blue. That'll work. I then need to make a new one. So I'm going to click Lambert again. This one is going to be maybe like a brown for the roof. And let's change that color. And if, oops, I didn't mean to do that. If we know some other ones that we might need, we could go ahead and make them. So if I do know I want a white as well. So I'm going to click Lambert, and it's fine if they're on top of each other. It honestly doesn't really matter. This one's just going to be white. Oops, not there. Sorry, hold on. This one is white. I'll change it to white. Now I can go in and start kind of assigning colors to different faces. So I know I want to do most of that roof. I actually want to do white trim along the sides of the roof, and that might be kind of annoying to select all of those. So instead, if I have one I know is going to be a little bit finicky, I can always assign that to the whole thing first. So rather than trying to select all of those white ones, I'm just going to right click on that model, assign existing material, and assign white to the whole thing. Then I'm going to just come in with my polygon select and select these faces around. Right click, assign existing material, and do blue. then let's do this. I'm going to select these two. And I do need to select all these around as well. But let me show you a selection trick. Rather than spending a bunch of time trying to click on all of those, a really helpful thing for, for selecting is if you have some selected, you can hold Shift and use the greater than or less than signs on your keyboard. So hold Shift, it's like the period key, or the period key and the comma key is like the greater than, less than. What it will do is expand your selection by 1 polygon or take it down by 1 polygon. So rather than spending a bunch of time clicking, we can just expand it once, because this one and this one was selected, and it selected all the ring, one out, so we get the rest of what we want selected. I'm then going to right click and turn that to brown. And now we have our cute little wooden house. Well, it's getting there. Let's add some more detail to this. Let's add a little front door. And we can do this not necessarily by modeling it on, but if we have a big enough detail, we could model this on as a separate piece. So we can just start by saying, you know what, this door is going to be closer to a cube. So I'm going to start with a cube. Move it out so we can see it. Let's go to our modeling, our attribute editor, and let's reshape this. I do know the baseline needs to be at the bottom. The height, let's make that height closer to 2. The 1 centimeter wide is pretty good for this, but that depth is a little bit much. So let's drop it down to maybe like a 0.25. That looks a little bit closer, so we can kind of sink it in like that. But, looking at this, we're going to have some polygons that we don't need. And it's always a good idea that if we know we don't need a polygon, we're never going to see it, to just go ahead and delete it. Since we're going to kind of sink this into there, we don't need this back polygon, so I'm just going to delete it. We'll then be able to kind of push this in, and we'll have that just kind of in there. But let's be a little bit fancy. Let's kind of give it a little bit of a door frame that we can assign different colors to. So overall, we're going to make this be a brown door. So let's just make this first brown. And then we're going to extrude out a door frame. So I'm going to select this face, and this face. And I'm going to use the extrude. And let's drop this down. It's a little bit much. And if we kind of start to play with this, we can see that we can just extrude it out maybe like 0.1. And that looks pretty good. Again, let's delete stuff we don't need. We don't, do you see how it made these back faces? We don't need these. Let's delete these. We can then go in and select these ones and expand my selection and assign these white. We can then push this in, and now we have a cute little door. We can do the same thing with if we wanted to make windows, but for the sake of time, I'm not going to add windows to this. I think this will be good enough. The last step that we need to do is we do need to combine these into a single thing. See how we have our house, we have our P cube 1. That's really messy. We just need this to be house. We don't need this to be all of these floating things. So how do we do this? We do this by combining them. So I'm going to select house. I'm going to hold shift and select P cube 1. And I'm going to use this combine over here. But I'm going to hold down shift before I select combine because I want to go into the settings, because there's one really important thing that we want to make sure that we do is we want to see where that pivot point is going to be. Do we want the pivot point to be in the center? Do we want the pivot point to be at the world origin, or do we want it to be at the last object selected? We're being really smart with this and we're building it at the origin. So I'm just going to actually keep it on world origin because I don't quite remember which order I selected this in. So let's just keep it that way. So I'm going to hit apply and notice what it did. We have house 1, but we also have these extra kind of ghosting transform group things. We kind of want to make sure that we're getting rid of this. It's basically garbage. We don't really need these anymore. It's kind of like backup ghost stuff that if we were to undo it, we would be able to undo and go back to like old things, but we ultimately don't need these. But the downside is if we delete them, our object gets deleted. So how do we handle this? What we need to do is we need to select our stuff and we need to delete its history. Once we delete the object's history from these, it'll kind of break that connection and we can get rid of this junk in our stuff. So I'm going to select it all. And you can delete history by just clicking this button here, delete by type history, or going to edit, delete all by type history. I use it so much, I actually have it on my custom shelf right here. So I'm just going to delete it using my custom shelf button. And most of the time they will disappear. If they don't disappear, as long as you deleted its history and maybe did a freeze transformation on it too, just in case, you can go ahead and just delete it out. It did give us an ugly name though. I'm going to go ahead and rename this back to house so that we have our nice singular house. Pivot is at the origin and we have our door attached to it too. So let's think of some other things that we can create to go with this. What if we created a nice, let's do like a little apple tree. That could be kind of fun to go with our house. So if I think of an apple tree, we're going to do, again, this is kind of like a toy. So it's very, very simple. I'm going to actually hide the house so I don't have to worry about it. So I'm going to select the house. I'm going to hit H on the keyboard for hide and notice that it dimmed it out. This means that it is hidden. It's still there, but we don't have to see it and we don't have to have it be in our way. If you need to bring it back, we can just hit H on the keyboard again to unhide it. And we can, visible, invisible, so that we don't have to have it in our way as we model, because I do want to model this apple tree at the origin. So I'm going to first work with the trunk of the tree. So I'm going to create a cylinder. So I'm going to create the cylinder. And I want to get this closer in size to what it needs to be. So let's go to the attribute editor, the poly cylinder. This radius way too big. So let's drop this closer to like a 0.25. Let's make sure that the height baseline is at the bottom. And I probably don't need it to be these many edges. I'm going to just drop it down to a 12. Go. Notice though, if we deselect it, that we get this sort of faceted sort of look. So selected, we can't really notice it, but when we deselect it, it's very faceted. This is where that hard edge, soft edge thing kind of comes into play. Sometimes by default, when you create assets, new edges, new polygons, it defaults to being a hard edge. Sometimes it might default to being a soft edge. This is a very easy thing for us to fix, and it can greatly change the look of your model. So let's fix this. We don't want it to look like that. We want it to be nice and smooth. The way that we do this, I'm going to select my edges that I wish to change. So this one's pretty easy. I can just drag and select those. We don't want to select all of them because we don't want this to be a soft edge. That would look kind of strange. I'm going to select what I want. I'm going to go underneath Mesh Display. I'm going to choose Soften Edge. Notice right above it, there is a harden edge, so it's very easy to go back and forth. In fact, I use this so much, I have it under here, underneath my custom shelf, Harden Edge, Soften Edge. because it's something that I'm doing quite a bit to affect the look of my model. You might have seen it kind of get a little bit of a change to it. If I deselect it, we can see now it has a nice smooth edge and it looks a lot nicer. So let's give it some shape. Let's add some shape to this. I kind of want to make it feel a little bit closer to like a tree, and you know, trees kind of taper a little bit. So why don't we insert some edge loops so that we can kind of control that. So usually for something like this, if I'm going to put it in like a very specific spot, or, you know, like I don't need it like exactly in the middle, I'm going to kind of eyeball it. I use underneath mesh tools this insert edge loop. The way that this works is it says click and drag on an edge, is I'll click on this edge right here. I'm still holding down that left mouse button. I can kind of determine where it's going to put that edge loop in. So maybe I'll put one, maybe right about there. I'll probably put another one closer to the middle. And then maybe one, you know, a little bit closer to the top. So now if I come in and I select all the way around, and I'm just doing this, the way I can do this quickly is if I just double click on an edge, if it loops all the way around, it will automatically select the whole thing, the whole loop for me. So that's just by double clicking on that. I can then get my scale tool and I can start to scale this upwards or downwards, depending on how you want to make a taper. I can then, you know, choose to scale this a little bit if I want to. I can also use my move tool to go up and down. Oops, my step still on. Let me turn that off. I don't need that right now. We're doing much more finer work. So I can kind of adjust this look. Maybe something like that. And it looks a little bit closer to like a wooden thing you might see for like a toy apple tree. How's it looking with our house? Let's size that. Yeah, that feels pretty good. It doesn't need to be a giant tree. It's just a little kind of toy tree. Since it is the trunk of the tree, let's go ahead and assign it our brown material. Just hold on. Let's try that again. And we have that trunk done. Okay, let's create the top of the tree now. The easiest way to do that is going to be out of a sphere. So I'm going to create a polygon sphere. And it's a little bit boring. Let's go mess with our attributes on this. Let's make that radius a little bit bigger. So maybe like a 2. Ooh, it's a little bit too big. We'll drop it back down to 1. We'll adjust it another way, but we can change our subdivision axes. Let's drop this down to, well, let's make it actually 24. I want to make it a nice even number. And our height, this we can drop down to maybe like a 12. We don't need that many going up and down. And our height baseline, let's put that there so we can easily push it in. This will be really handy for our next step too. Again, look, by default, do you see how it's got those rings? And that might be kind of the look you want to go for. Like you might need that sort of look, but not for us. I'm going to select all of those edges and soften them. So we have a nice smooth one. I'm going to change the look of this though. I'm going to get my scale tool and I'm going to squish it down a little bit on the y-axis, but the z and x, I'm actually going to scale it out some just to kind of get closer to one of these kind of shapes. Maybe something like that. I kind of want to give it, you know, a little bit more of an interest too. It's very round and trees can have a lot more shape to, so watch this. I'm going to get my select tool. I'm going to double click. I'm going to actually go to my top viewport. I'm going to double click. It's going to select this edge all the way around. I'm going to double click this one, and this one. I'm then going to come in, I'm just doing this just to make it easier for me to see. So it's going to be selected, not selected, not selected. All the way around. So it's kind of even. You see that? Now watch this. Let me go back to my perspective. I'm going to get my scale tool again with just those edges selected. I'm going to scale in all directions. Do you see how it's kind of scaling it inwards? And it just gives it a slightly more interesting sort of shape to it. Do you see that? If we don't quite like what it did to the top, that's fine. I'll show you a little trick. I'm going to double click to get that ring. I'm going to scale it down like I'm scaling it to nothing, and you see how it smooths it all back out. So we just have like a little bit more interesting shape than our usual one. I'm going to fix the bottom one too. Select the round. Scale it down just to flatten it. And it's kind of like a bulbousy, but it's got a little bit of a waviness to it. If we want to make this a little bit more exaggerated, we could come around then with the vertex select. I'm going to select one vertex, and I'm going to use the soft selection. So watch this. Soft selection will allow us to, it's called soft selection because what it does is that's your main one, and then it will affect the rest of the vertices around it based off of, you know, this. Like how far do you want the effect to do? So I have this set on a centimeter of 1. Effect of 1, so 1 centimeter kind of out. And let's work on kind of playing with this for a little bit. So watch what it does. It will go to a better view. See, if I pull this, it kind of pulls things close to it a lot, and then a little, and then a little, then none. So we can kind of give it a more organic sort of shape. If we want to kind of play with it a little bit to make it feel a little bit more like a tree, since trees are not very even. This is a very even looking tree, but it's kind of a fun tool just to play with. We don't want to go overboard with it, but it can be kind of like a nice way just to give it a little bit more of a natural sort of feel. So just a little. And I don't want to push it too hard. I don't want to make this video too long while I play with the tool, but this will also work for like scaling too. So like we could scale up like these, like some areas, then pull it out to kind of really change the shape of this. So it just doesn't look like a crazy, just like a sphere, because spheres are kind of boring. There we go. There's our tree. We do need to assign it a color. We didn't make a green yet. Rather than go into the hypershade though, I'm just going to select it, right click, say add assign new material. We'll do our Lambert. We'll call this one green. And we will change this to like a nice green color. There we go. Last, let's add a couple apples to this. So I am going to just use another sphere, a lot smaller than this. We do not need to have this be so large since it's just little tiny apples. 0.2. Let's see, how does that look? Ooh, maybe like a 0.1. We definitely don't need this much. This is going to be like an 8 and an 8. They're really tiny. And before I forget, I'm going to move this back to the origin. And let me hide these real quick. I'm going to do something a little bit fancier. Let's, sorry. Let's make it red. So assign new material. Red. Did I not assign it? Oops, I assigned it to the wrong thing. Sorry about that. That's why I was acting up. Let me hide these again and make sure the apple is selected. That's why it's important to name your things red. There we go. All right. Let's smooth out its edges because it is a little bit faceted. And let's see where we're at. Let's turn these back on. So we need to, put our apples on, but this could take a little, we could do this. I'm Control D, move it. We could do this a couple times. What if we had to do it a whole bunch of times though? Like we wanted to add a bunch of them. One thing we could do is we could get a whole bunch in here and we could Control D it again. We can do more than one and then just select this and just kind of put it in where we want it to go. What if though we wanted this to be a little bit more uniform? Obviously apples, we don't want this to be uniform, but let's say we did. We needed to kind of keep it nice and even, where they're kind of dispersed the same around. Don't forget that we manipulate things through where our pivot point is. And if we were to change its pivot point, we could utilize that to kind of help place things. Again, not going to work well for our tree, but this might come in handy for a possibly like an assignment or something like that you might have to do. So watch this. I have my apple. I'm going to change its pivot point to the origin. So I'm actually going to hold down the X key as I move my pivot point so that it snaps to the grid. Because what I want it to do is snap directly to 0, 0, 0. Turn edit pivot off because now if I rotate it, notice it's rotating around that origin. So if I were to place one, Control D, Control D, I can easily place this kind of like in a ring if I needed to, so that these are evenly, kind of dispersed around. But again, not something we need for this project, but it could possibly come in handy for another project. So let's kind of finalize this. Like once we have enough apples, like I said, I was really naughty and didn't name these. I really should have, but that's okay. The last thing we really need to do is combine these together into a single thing. So this will be good practice for us. So let's select everything we need to combine. And it should be all of this stuff, because remember, we hid the house so we wouldn't see it. And then it's easy to kind of like select things too. I'm then going to hold Shift and click Combine and make sure that our pivot position is going to be at the world origin. So I'm going to hit Apply. Close that. We are left with all of this junk, and we don't really want to keep this junk in here, but we can't just delete it yet. We first need to select it, and we need to delete its history. If we're lucky, it did delete it all out for us. If not, you should be able to delete it out yourself. I can now name this to tree, and we can unhide our house. So now we have our tree, a little wood tree next to our little wood house. We could even like duplicate this tree, put it over here and rotate this around so we have a different look to it. And we have our nice, cute little wooden house and apple trees. Hopefully you have found this to be helpful. This, again, very fundamental use of tools. There are other tutorials out there. If you need extra help with this, need a little bit more, you're getting into the project and you're finding that you're struggling, definitely try out some of the other tutorial videos that have been posted to SGD 114 to guide you through all of this. So let's wrap it up, and I will see you in another video.